August 14, 2003, a hot summer afternoon in New York City. Offices are humming with air conditioning, subways are running, everything seems normal. Then, at 4:05 p.m., the lights go out. Not just in one building, not just in one neighborhood, the entire city goes dark. And it's not just New York, Toronto, Detroit, Cleveland. 55 million people across 8 states and 2 Canadian provinces suddenly lose power. The Great Northeast Blackout of 2003 was the biggest power failure in North American history. And it all started because some tree branches touched a power line in Ohio. That's right, a few tree branches took down the electrical grid for 55 million people. Here's what most people don't understand. Our electrical grid is incredibly fragile. Electricity can't be stored easily, so it has to be generated at the exact moment it's being used. Supply and demand have to match perfectly, every single second, or the whole system collapses. It's like trying to balance on a tightrope while juggling chainsaws, and we've been doing it this way for over 100 years, but something is changing right now, and it's going to completely transform who has power literally and figuratively. Energy storage technology is finally becoming viable at a massive scale, and whoever controls energy storage will control the electrical grid, and you control modern civilization. Countries around the world are racing to dominate this technology. Billions of dollars are being invested, supply chains are being built, and strategic materials are being secured. Most people have no idea this battle is even happening. Today, we're going deep into the energy storage wars. We'll explore why storage matters so much, who's winning the race to dominate it, and what it means when one country controls the batteries that power the world. Because this isn't just about technology, it's about power in every sense of the word. Alright, let's start with why energy storage is such a big deal. For over a century, the electrical grid has operated on a simple principle: generate electricity, transmit it, and use it immediately. No storage. This works fine when you're burning coal or natural gas. You can turn power plants up or down based on demand. But this system is terrible for renewable energy. Solar panels generate electricity when the sun's shining. Wind turbines generate when the wind's blowing. But people need electricity at night and on calm days. Without storage, renewable energy is unreliable. For decades, this was the killer argument against renewables. They're intermittent, they can't provide baseload power, and they were right. Until now, energy storage solves this fundamental problem. With big enough batteries, you can store solar energy from the day and use it at night. You can save wind energy from breezy periods and release it during calm ones. Suddenly, renewables become reliable. They can replace fossil fuels completely, but it goes way beyond that. Energy storage fundamentally changes how the entire grid works. With storage, you can prevent blackouts. When there's a sudden surge in demand, batteries can instantly fill the gap. That tree branch in Ohio, with enough battery storage, it would have been a minor local issue, not a regional catastrophe. With storage, you can make the grid dramatically more efficient. You can even enable a decentralized grid where homes and businesses generate and store their own power. This is transformative stuff. And the country that dominates energy storage technology doesn't just get a successful industry. They get strategic control over the future of energy itself. That's why this is a war, not just a market competition. So what technology is winning this race? Lithium-ion batteries. The same tech in your phone is now being used for massive grid storage. And here's the uncomfortable truth. China absolutely dominates lithium-ion battery production. It's not even close. China controls about 77% of global manufacturing capacity. They produce more batteries than the rest of the world combined. But it goes deeper. Let's trace the supply chain. Most of the world's lithium gets shipped to China for refining. About 70% of the world's cobalt comes from the Congo, and Chinese companies have a major stake in those mines. Then, over 80% of that cobalt is refined in China. They also control 90% of graphite processing. See the pattern? China systematically built control over the entire battery supply chain, from raw materials to finished products. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate industrial policy. In the early 2000s, while the West focused on oil and gas, China identified batteries as a strategic industry. They provided massive subsidies and invested in mining globally. Now China can produce lithium-ion batteries cheaper than anyone else. And here's where it gets geopolitical. Energy storage is becoming as strategically important as oil once was. Controlling the battery supply chain gives China enormous leverage. If tensions escalate, China could restrict battery exports. Western countries trying to transition to renewable energy would be stuck. Their solar and wind farms would be useless without storage. It's a modern version of an oil embargo, but potentially more powerful. The United States woke up late to the battery dominance problem. Really late. But now they're throwing enormous resources at trying to catch up. In 2022, the US passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which included massive incentives for domestic battery production. We're talking tax credits, requirements that batteries and subsidized electric vehicles be made in North America, and billions for domestic mining. It's the most aggressive American industrial policy since World War II, and it's specifically designed to counter Chinese battery dominance. The results are actually impressive. Since the law passed, companies have announced over $100 billion in new battery manufacturing investments in the United States. Factories are popping up across the South and Midwest. Ford, General Motors, Tesla, they're all building battery plants. Foreign companies like Samsung, LG, and Panasonic are building facilities in the US just to access these subsidies. By 2030, America aims to have enough domestic battery manufacturing to supply its entire electric vehicle market without imports, but there's a huge problem. Raw materials. America has lithium deposits, significant ones, in Nevada, North Carolina, and California, but mining them is incredibly difficult, not for technical reasons, but for political and environmental ones. Mining is dirty. It destroys landscapes, uses enormous amounts of water, and creates toxic waste. And Americans really don't want mines in their backyards. A proposed lithium mine in Nevada called Thacker Pass, one of the largest deposits in the world, has been tied up in environmental reviews and lawsuits for years. Even if it gets final approval, it won't start production until at least 2027, maybe later. Meanwhile, China is financing lithium mines across South America and Africa, securing supply for decades. The US is trying to play catch-up, but China has a 10 to 15-year head start. That's a massive gap to close. Some American strategists argue that competing on lithium-ion is a losing battle. Instead, they say America should bet on next-generation battery technologies where China doesn't have an insurmountable advantage. Solid-state batteries, sodium-ion batteries, flow batteries. These could potentially be better than lithium-ion, and the US has strong research capabilities. Companies like QuantumScape are developing solid-state batteries that, if they work at scale, could be safer, longer-lasting, and use less problematic materials. The hope is that America can leapfrog China's dominance by pioneering the next generation of storage. It's a risky bet, but it might be the only viable path. Now, Europe is taking a different approach. They're using their biggest weapon: regulation and market access. The European Union is implementing something called the battery passport. By 2027, every battery sold in Europe will need a digital record documenting its entire life cycle. Where were the materials mined? Under what labor and environmental conditions? What's the carbon footprint? This is brilliant strategic policy disguised as environmental regulation because, guess what? Chinese batteries, made with cobalt from questionable mines and manufactured in coal-powered factories, are going to have a tough time meeting these standards. Europe is also building its own battery industry. The flagship project is Northvolt, a Swedish company that's built Europe's largest battery factory. Northvolt is explicitly positioned as the European alternative to Chinese batteries, using ethically sourced materials and renewable energy. Volkswagen and BMW have invested heavily. It's a classic European strategy: create a regional champion and protect it with regulations. But Europe faces the same raw materials problem as America. Their solution is partnerships with countries like Chile and Australia, framing them as ethical alternatives to Chinese deals. This is where things get really interesting, because lithium-ion might not be the final answer, especially for grid storage. For grid storage, you don't care about weight, you care about cost, safety, and longevity, and several alternative technologies might be better. First, sodium-ion batteries. They use sodium, which you can get from seawater. It's incredibly abundant, and guess who's leading in sodium-ion development? China. Again, the world's largest battery maker, CATL, is already mass-producing them. Then there are flow batteries. They store energy in liquid electrolytes held in external tanks. The bigger the tanks, the more energy you store. They're not great for cars, but for grid storage, they can discharge for many hours without degrading and are extremely safe. Western companies are actually competitive here. Some companies are even pursuing non-chemical solutions like compressed air and gravity storage. These sound almost primitive, but they work. They're durable, long-lasting, and use no rare materials. You can even store energy as heat. Use excess electricity to heat up sand or molten salt to extremely high temperatures. Then extract that heat later to generate electricity. It's remarkably efficient and uses incredibly cheap, abundant materials. The race is far from over. While China dominates lithium-ion today, these alternative technologies could completely change the storage landscape, and in that race, nobody has a clear lead just yet. Alright, let's zoom out and look at the bigger strategic picture, because the battery wars are about way more than just energy. Electric vehicles are the future of transportation. Pretty much everyone agrees on this. The real question is whose batteries will power them. If Chinese batteries dominate the market, then Chinese companies effectively control a critical component of every single electric vehicle made anywhere in the world. That creates huge economic dependencies and strategic vulnerabilities for everyone else. The US and Europe are now desperately trying to build up their own domestic battery capacity because they understand that losing the EV battery race means losing their entire automotive industry. Think about it. Germany's entire economy is built on making incredible cars. If German cars become nothing more than assembly operations for Chinese batteries and motors, Germany loses its economic crown jewel. America's auto industry, which has already been battered by decades of global competition, simply cannot afford to become dependent on Chinese battery supplies. This isn't just about batteries anymore. It's about preserving entire industrial sectors and millions of jobs. Now, let's talk about grid control as a matter of national security. Here's a scenario that keeps defense planners awake at night. What if your nation's critical grid infrastructure relies on batteries and control systems made in China? And then, imagine there's a major conflict over Taiwan. Could China remotely disable those batteries? Could they have built-in backdoors or vulnerabilities that could be exploited? Even if the answer is no, what if they simply refuse to provide replacement parts or software updates, effectively crippling your power grid over time? This might sound paranoid, but it's the exact same logic that led the US and Europe to ban Huawei from their 5G networks. Critical infrastructure controlled by a potential adversary is a massive national security risk. As batteries become absolutely essential for grid stability, countries are realizing they need domestic control over this technology. It's not just for economic reasons, but for fundamental security. And here's where the competition gets really intense. The developing world battleground. We're talking about nations across Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America. These countries are either building out their electrical grids for the very first time or massively expanding their existing ones. The decisions they make right now about what technology to use will lock in dependencies for decades to come. If they choose Chinese batteries and grid systems, they become part of China's sphere of influence. If they choose Western technology, they align with the US and Europe. Both sides are on the ground, offering attractive deals, financing, and technology transfers. This is a competition for long-term strategic alignment, with energy storage as the new battlefield. Some countries, like India, are trying to chart a third path. They're working to build their own domestic battery industries to avoid becoming dependent on either side. It's working to some degree, but honestly, they're years behind the leaders in this race. So after all this, who's actually winning the energy storage wars? Let's be honest, right now, China is winning, and they're winning decisively. They have the manufacturing capacity, they control the supply chains, they're scaling up faster than anyone else, and they're already pivoting to next-generation technologies like sodium-ion before Western countries have even caught up on lithium-ion. China's 20-year head start is really showing their systematic long-term approach to building strategic industries is paying off massively. But the race isn't over, not by a long shot. America's new industrial policy is starting to show results. Those hundreds of billions of dollars in announced factory investments are real. In 5 years, the US will have significant domestic battery production for the first time in a long time. Europe's regulatory approach is creating a protected market for European-made batteries. Companies like Northvolt and others have some breathing room to scale up without being crushed by immediate competition. And the race for alternative technologies is still wide open. Solid-state, sodium-ion, flow batteries, thermal storage. Whoever cracks the code on the best, cheapest grid-scale storage technology could leapfrog the current leaders. And here's the thing about technology races. They can flip incredibly quickly. Remember Kodak? They dominated photography for a century until digital cameras emerged. Nokia dominated mobile phones until smartphones changed everything. One breakthrough in battery technology could completely reshuffle the deck. China's current dominance is in lithium-ion, but if the future is sodium-ion or solid-state or something else entirely, then today's advantage might not matter as much tomorrow. That said, let's not underestimate them. China is aggressively pursuing every single one of these technologies simultaneously. They are not sitting still. They're innovating, investing, and scaling across multiple approaches. The West's best hope is probably to accept that China will likely dominate the commodity, low-cost battery market, but compete fiercely on next-generation technologies and high-value, specialized applications. It's not a perfect strategy, but it might be the most realistic one. So here's what all of this comes down to. Energy storage is the linchpin of the entire clean energy transition, and whoever controls energy storage technology has enormous strategic power. We've talked about batteries, supply chains, geopolitics, and technology. But underneath all of it is a fundamental question. Who do you want controlling the infrastructure that powers modern civilization? For 100 years, oil was the critical energy resource. The countries that controlled oil production had outsized global influence. Wars were fought over it. Entire economies rose and fell based on its price and availability. We are now transitioning to a world where batteries matter as much as oil once did, maybe even more, because batteries are what enable the entire renewable energy system to function. China has positioned itself brilliantly for this new era. Through long-term strategic planning, massive investment, and systematic control of supply chains, they've built a dominant position in battery technology. The West is trying to respond, but they're playing catch-up. And catching up is really hard when your competitor has a decade-long head start and continues to innovate aggressively. But here's my genuinely held belief. This competition might actually be a good thing for the world. If there were no competition, if one country had a complete monopoly on battery technology, there'd be less innovation. Prices would be higher. Progress would be slower. The fact that America, Europe, China, and others are racing against each other is driving an unprecedented wave of investment in battery technology. Costs are plummeting. Performance is improving. New, better technologies are being developed every day. The world is getting better batteries faster, precisely because of this competition. The big risk is that this competition becomes destructive rather than productive. If countries start hoarding technology, restricting the export of critical materials, or weaponizing energy storage, then everyone loses. The ideal outcome is a fierce competition that drives innovation, but one that still maintains some level of cooperation and open markets. That's a delicate balance, and it's not at all clear we'll be able to achieve it, but the stakes are just too high to fail. We need energy storage to solve climate change. We need it to make renewable energy viable on a global scale. We need it to build a sustainable civilization for the future. The energy storage wars will shape the 21st century as much as oil shaped the 20th. Who wins this race might determine which countries lead the global economy for the next 100 years. Right now, the outcome is uncertain, and that uncertainty should motivate all of us to pay closer attention to these battles that are happening in laboratories, factories, and boardrooms around the world. Because whoever controls the grid controls the future. So what do you think? Is China's battery dominance inevitable, or can the West catch up? Should governments be aggressively intervening in these markets, or should they let competition play out naturally? And what battery technology do you think will ultimately win? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this video helped you understand a global competition you didn't even know was happening, hit that subscribe button. We break down the strategic battles shaping our future every single week. The energy storage wars are just beginning, and the outcome will affect all of us. See you in the next one.